Good morning, everyone. We have lots of people signing in. Welcome to our first ever joint ARP ARPA Readiness Summit. We're just going to wait a little longer. I'm watching the little ticker at the bottom, and people are still coming in very actively. Chief Risky, if you could go off camera for a second, that would be helpful. Thank you. Give it a couple of more minutes. My staff thinks that I don't know that we're live. We have over 1,200 people who said they were going to be here today. And so I'm watching this little ticker try to get up to closer to that number. We should have had music though. Darn it, I didn't think. We could have had music. Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Tina Hone, Chief for Community Engagement for Mayor Lori Lightfoot. It's my privilege to open up today's first ever Joint Readiness Summit organized by the city, the county, and the state in partnership on behalf of the people of Greater Chicago. We will be hearing later this morning from Lightfoot, President Preckwinkle, and Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. But for now, I wanted to cover some housekeeping things. So if we could flip to my housekeeping slide. We did receive notes at registration that there were some people who needed Spanish language interpretation. If you look on the bottom of your screen, there's a little globes looking thing. It's on the far right on the bottom of my screen. If you click there, our interpreter, our Spanish language interpreter will be on that line providing interpretation. We also, the city of Chicago, and I'm sure the county and state, we pride ourselves on being inclusive. We have an ASL interpreter who will be on the screen at all times and spotlighted. We've also enabled closed captioning. There may be something you have to do on your side on your device in order to see the closed captioning, but it is enabled. Chat has been disabled for this conference because we have so many people who are participating. It's really hard to look for two chains of information. And so if you have questions, and there will be question and answer periods after every section, we ask that you put them in the Q&A section. There will be times when we use chat to send messages out to you. For example, we will have breakout sessions later this afternoon. We'll be sending you the link. There may be glitches that come up, but chat has been disabled for incoming messages, but don't be surprised if you see a chat from one of us for an outcoming message. This meeting is being recorded. You probably saw that when you came in, but I like to reinforce that. It is also completely open to the public and to the press and the media. They may not have registered, but everything we say, we should assume our friends in the media are able to hear and talk about and present through their various outlets. And then finally, if there is a question or concern, we have a website, communityengagement@cityofchicago.org. Two members of my team are manning that and watching that. So Bart and Vance, you're our guys, and they will be monitoring that particular email address for any questions and concerns. It's now my privilege to turn the event over to my good friend, the Chief of Staff. I think I'm going to Del Reese Adams, the Acting Executive Director for ICEJA at the state. Del Reese.
Thank you so much, Tina. I am extremely excited and happy to be here and share with you the purpose for today's event. And it is exactly what it is named. It is a readiness event, and the purpose is to get the community and community-based organizations and businesses ready. We want to provide today a general overview of the American Rescue Plan Act, which some people you will hear referred to as ARPA, and other economic recovery funds that will become available over the next few years. The purpose today is also to advise organizations and businesses that have never done business with the city of Chicago, Cook County, or the state of Illinois of what those eligibility requirements are to apply for grants and contracts. And we want to ensure that organizations and businesses understand the complexity of compliance requirements for publicly funded grants. So we will be giving high-level technical assistance in regards to reporting, vouchering, and reimbursement processes, and any special concerns that are related to federal funds. So this is a very exciting summit. And at this time, I will pass it over to Lynetta Haynes-Turner, who is the Chief of Staff for President Preckwinkle at Cook County.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Del Reese and Tina. As Del Reese mentioned, we have a really packed day today for this virtual summit. I will say that this is unprecedented, the amount of collaboration across all state agencies from the state of Illinois on down to the county and the city of Chicago. We will start the full agenda shortly with greetings from our dignitaries, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, my president, Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, and then Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. There are 3 plenary sessions for the morning. As Del Reese had mentioned, we really want to provide an overview around what each of the agencies will be offering in terms of ARPA and economic recovery. Then we will move into plenary session around eligibility. And then the 3rd plenary session this morning is going to be compliance, reporting, and reimbursements. We have a packed agenda for all of those sessions. Each of the agencies, the state, city, and county will have a few slides to share with you all for that. And then we will take a lunch break. Now, this lunch break in particular is going to be awesome because it really is about the resources and supports for new grantees and vendors. And so we have external partners from Chicago Community Trust, Forefront, Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and the YMCA, who are all going to be on for that afternoon session. The plenary sessions in the afternoon, there are going to be 3 tracks, and you are able to go into the one that you have the most interest. The first track is community services. We will be talking about our violence prevention efforts, human services, and workforce development. So there are grant opportunities either on the streets now or will be soon, and that is some of the information that will be shared. Track B is transportation, infrastructure, and sustainability. And then track C is community development, which includes everything from community investments, small business support, housing, and the arts. Now, what I will reiterate is that the full slide deck for the entire day's activities will be available. I believe we're going to put them on all of our websites, including the shared website that was stood up as part of our partnership, Greater Chicago Together. And so if you are not able to stay for the entire day, no worries. This is recorded and streamlined, and you will have that presentation deck shortly thereafter. So looking forward to kicking off the day, and I will turn it back over to Tina.
Thank you, everyone. And so now just a few caveats before we get to people who are way more important than us. This is just the beginning. This is the first chance that we've come out to really speak to community and share really top line information. It will not be the last. You'll even hear about other opportunities to learn about ARPA grants and ARPA contracts and other recovery contracts throughout this conference. We again want to, I want to emphasize this very general information. We'll go into greater depth in the weeks and months ahead. Again, we're so excited about this website. So you're going to keep hearing us talk about this greaterchicagotogether.org. Just so it will be the best place for you to be up to date with everyone, in addition to all of our individual websites. There will be Q&As after every section. It is impossible for us to get to every Q&A that's going to come up. But I do want you to know we are saving all of them, and we will be having a document of frequently asked questions, and it will be updated on a rolling basis. And again, that will be on the Greater Chicago Together website and also the City of Chicago's website and other of our leaders' websites. The final thing that I would ask you is for your patience and grace. I lead a team of perfectionists. I am a perfectionist, where we know that nothing is going to be perfect. This is a very ambitious project that we put together very, very quickly. We are at the mercy of technology. Things may be clunky, but the information, it will be there. It'll be very rich information. There is a very, very quick poll that we would like to ask you to fill out. It's 4 questions so that we know here at the beginning of this summit how big your organization is. Do you serve the city, the city and the county, other parts of the state? How long you've been in business, that sort of thing, because that will help us understand who we've reached. And so, and this is going to be one of those tests of technology. Laura, are you able to send the link to the poll into the chat? And so the folks who are in the audience can fill that out. And there it is, miraculously. So go to the chat that I said was disabled for you, but is enabled for us. But if you could fill out that survey, 4 quick questions so that we have an idea of who we're reaching today. It's going to be super helpful for us as we plan for the future. And I'm going to take a couple of minutes while you all fill that out. Again, wish I had Muzak, but if you could take a couple of minutes to do that, And then we'll get ready for the next panel. Thank you, everyone. So we're just waiting for a few more
Estamos esperando
to join.
algunas personas para que se conecten.
And Alejandra, I think you may need to,
Alejandra, yo creo que tú.
Luis, you may need to mute.
Good morning. I'm the Spanish interpreter.
Yes, and I think you are to be in a separate, in a different room. Nubia, can you help us out there? There goes our technology friends.
Yes, 1 second.
And we have the mayor, the lieutenant, the president, lieutenant governor ready to go. So we'll mute everyone else. And how about we spotlight, go to our dignitaries.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mayor.
Shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today to kick off our first ever joint Readiness Summit, which will ensure that nonprofits, community organizations, and vendors like yourself are not only aware of economic recovery funding opportunities provided in part by the American Rescue Plan Act, but also understand what you need to do in order to be eligible to participate in the various bid and programming opportunities. Joining the city in this incredible effort are our partners and colleagues from Cook County and from the state. And I want to personally welcome Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, as well as our great Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, who you'll hear from in a moment. I'm personally very excited about our partnership, which not only highlights our ability to work together on behalf of residents across Chicago, Cook County, and Illinois, but our commitment to ensuring that you have what you need to continue helping our great city and our region. Each and every one of you have played a vital role during the pandemic, helping to sustain a social safety net and provide essential services to our residents across the city, county, and state. And we truly owe you a debt of gratitude and thank you for all you've done. And we recognize the challenges that you have faced during this challenging time and your service delivery. The American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, has provided states and municipalities with once-in-a-generation funding to address the immediate effects of COVID-19, as well as lay the foundation for a successful recovery. And given how crucial you all are to our neighborhoods and local economies, some of this funding has been set aside to provide community stakeholders like yourselves and small business owners with much needed relief. That's why this summit is designed to walk you through the process of how the city, Cook County, and the state are working collaboratively to streamline the public's access to these historic opportunities. And why I'm thrilled to announce that the City of Chicago's City Equitable Social Services Contracting Policy is one of the first policies of its kind, which will equitably distribute funding coming through the city. This policy will set the goals through which the city will make its social services RFP and a contracting process more accessible to local and smaller organizations. To advance the vision of this framework, I'm excited to also announce the City of Chicago will begin the rollout of a cash advance policy for new RFPs to help community organizations get part of their ARPA funding faster than ever before. This new policy will allow eligible grant recipients to get 25% of the award in advance, essentially acting as bridge funding so smaller organizations can get their operations up and running quickly. And the more we know about and the faster we can send out these once in a lifetime federal investments, the better prepared we will be to turn them into life-changing opportunities for our residents and the neighborhoods they call home. In addition, this summit will also provide community organizations, businesses, and residents with a broad overview of the kinds of opportunities that are and will become available over the next 3 years, with emphasis on broad. The government agencies represented today do not have all the answers at this moment. However, we have enough to give you a bird's eye view of what's coming down the road, which is important in and of itself. We are coming to you now because we want to give all of you, and especially the smaller organizations and businesses who may have never done business with the city or received grant funding directly from the city, county, or state, plenty of time to get ready, to apply for opportunities, to translate federal relief funds into tangible benefits for individuals, families, and communities. We also wanted to help you understand the challenges that may come up with the receipt of government grants and contracts. In other words, there's unfortunately a lot of strings attached, but we want to make sure that we cut through the bureaucratic red tape and help support you in your efforts. After today's 3 plenary sessions, you will each leave with a better idea of the funding opportunities as well as general timeline of their availability, a stronger grasp on the eligibility requirements that come along with it, including administrative guidelines and rules, and a solid understanding of the compliance, reimbursement, and auditing processes with a special emphasis on some of the specific rules related to federal funding. In addition, you will have an opportunity to collaborate with your peers and government representatives to formalize your structures, as well as discuss specific funding areas such as violence prevention, youth development, public health, and more. ARPA and the other recovery and infrastructure funding opportunities have provided us with a once-in-a-lifetime chance, a chance to bring about transformative change, rebuild our economy and our communities and make them more resilient. And I just want to say in closing, each of you play a vital role in helping accomplish this task. We can't do this work without you, which is why we thought the leaders, government leaders that are assembled here today, why we believe that it was so critically important that we provide you with all the education, information, and support that's going to be needed to help you be successful in accessing these funds and then serving the various residents and stakeholders that you've been serving for such a long time. I would just say this, and then I'm going to turn to President Preckwinkle. Many of you have been in conversation with us about your challenges, both because you've been on the front lines for the last 2 years and because doing business sometimes with government, and I will say for the city, isn't always easy. We've heard you, and we're going to keep listening and making sure that we do everything we can to remove barriers, get rid of the bureaucratic red tape, but also help support you in doing the work. And I've said this to many of you before. I know that many of you are about the work, about the delivery of services, not setting up a back office with accountants and auditors and so forth. We understand that, and we will be making an announcement later about how we're going to support you to do the work that needs to be done in delivery of services, but also make sure that you are in compliance without having to go and build up a whole new set of administrative infrastructure that nobody has the time or resources to be able to do. So stay tuned on that. But I'm proud to say that one of the things that we've done in listening to you is making sure that we're going to give you pre-payment so you can get started. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle. And again, President Preckwinkle and Lieutenant Governor Stratton, I thank you and your team for the work that we've been doing together now for some months to coordinate to make sure that we are meeting the needs in the best way that we can and maximizing the resources that are available to all of us. Again, thank you. And President Preckwinkle, take it away.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking our partners at the city and state who've worked alongside Cook County to plan today's Readiness Summit. I also want to thank the many residents, leaders of community-based organizations and not-for-profits, and business owners who are here today. Your knowledge and understanding of the unique strengths and challenges faced by your communities are key to bringing real and lasting change to Cook County. This Readiness Summit is an important milestone for the state of Illinois, the county of Cook, and the city of Chicago. Today, we present a coordinated plan for a historic level of investment made possible by the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. The federal government has not made this level of investment in our local units of government and our residents since the 1930s. I cannot stress enough how important this collaboration is. While the state of Illinois, Cook County, and the city of Chicago all share the same unwavering commitment to best serve and support residents, we've not previously coordinated our efforts at this level. This level of coordination is a heavy lift for sure, but it's precisely what we need to effectively and equitably steward this historic funding. Today is about awareness. Today, we collaboratively announce our plans to help you prepare for the investments to come. We want our residents, not-for-profits, and businesses to know all about the grant opportunities available to them and to understand how and when to apply for these grants. This transparency, this baseline awareness and understanding will ensure funding is granted in an effective and equitable manner. Cook County is the recipient of almost $1 billion in American Rescue Plan Act funding. Over the past year, the county has engaged in an open and collaborative process with residents, stakeholders, community groups, and elected officials to plan for the allocation of this funding. The resulting plan builds on the existing work of the county by focusing on the following areas: community safety and criminal justice, focused on violence prevention; health and wellness, including mental health services; economic development, including support for workers, households, and small businesses; sustainability, focused on environmental justice and hazard mitigation; and finally, public infrastructure, focused on transportation and water infrastructure, as well as digital equity. To learn more about Cook County's collaborative action plan and process and ARP funding plan, visit engagecookcounty.com. That's engagecookcounty.com. Our partners at the city and state have many of the same goals and priorities for their ARPA funding. We all want to see safer, healthier, more equitable, and resilient communities. We all prioritize investment in proven strategies, services, and programs. That's why we're aligning our work to ensure our investments complement one another. We're targeting communities with the highest need without redundancy. Violence prevention is a prime example. Responding to the urgent need for more programs and services that address the root causes of violence in our communities, we convened an intergovernmental municipal working group to coordinate state, county, and city violence prevention grant opportunities. Using the data for fatal and non-fatal shootings in 2021, the group prioritized geographic areas with the highest rates of violence for ARPA funding grant opportunities. I want to acknowledge that our plans are ambitious. They seek to address complex, systemic issues such as crime and violence and health and economic inequities. We know that this is a challenge, almost a daunting challenge. However, we have two major assets that will leverage this work. The first is ARPA funding, and the second is you. The American Rescue Plan Act is bringing a historic level of investment to our region. This is the level of investment that can create real sustainable change. We also have in you a wealth of knowledge and experience. We have academic institutions, advocates, businesses, and community-based organizations that have developed effective strategies to improve the lives of individuals and strengthen our communities. We know that local organizations have an intimate knowledge of the unique challenges and needs of their communities. Through imminent grant funding and strategic capacity building, organizations will finally have the support they need to best serve their communities and bring about lasting change. While this Readiness Summit is just the beginning of the grant process, it's a symbol of the unprecedented, exciting work that is to come. I hope that today is informative and empowering, and thank you again for your participation. And now I'd like to welcome my friend, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is healthy and well and warm. I'm Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to be with you today. Thank you, President Preckwinkle, for that warm introduction, and more importantly, thank you for your continued collaboration to uplift communities in Cook County and beyond. The road to recovery is a team effort, and all of us need to be all in. So I'd also like to take this time to thank Mayor Lori Lightfoot for ensuring Chicago's community organizations, nonprofits, and small businesses, who are cornerstones of this city really, have the tools they need to thrive through this partnership. During Wednesday's budget address, Governor J.B. Pritzker made a powerful point. that a truly effective approach to addressing violence in our state is a major investment and a commitment to seeing that investment through. Today, we stand together as your elected officials to say, we are investing in you and we are working together so our city, our county, and our state can rise as one. We are at a critical moment in that journey. Funds from the American Rescue Plan Act and other economic recovery efforts offer an historic opportunity to heal, grow, and move forward. These funds can have a tremendous impact, and it's crucial that equity is at the center of distributing them. And that's what makes this summit so important. We know that all of you joining us who work in and for your communities every single day are a life source. And we know that you have faced immense challenges over the last 2 years. You deserve the resources that will empower your institutions to continue doing meaningful work. Small businesses and organizations deserve the tools to expand their reach and positively impact more lives. And our Black and Brown communities deserve investments that can close the racial wealth gap by putting their livelihoods at the forefront. And you deserve government that works with you on those solutions. All hands are on deck so that you can leave this summit today with the answers you need, all in hand, to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime funding opportunities coming through all levels of government. By the way, as you consider applying for funding, I also want to draw your attention to the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program, or R3 as we call it. We are currently accepting applications for grant funding violence prevention, economic development, youth development, re-entry services, and civil legal aid, serving communities most harmed by disinvestment and the war on drugs. You can learn more at r3.illinois.gov. Again, that's r3.illinois.gov. With that, I'd like to thank the representatives from the city, Cook County, and the state of Illinois who will be conducting today's sessions and providing the essential information. This is what it looks like to join forces for the betterment of our communities, and I'm so proud to see this collaboration in action. We know that there's more work to do, and we know there's a need for more summits like this across the state in the months to come. And we're not done yet. We will continue to work tirelessly for all of Illinois because we are in this together. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Martina Hone.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Gracias, gracias.
I want to say how incredible it is to be in the company of the three most powerful women in the state, the Lieutenant Governor, President Preckwinkle, and of course, my mayor. So that was amazing to hear from all three of you. And I hope everyone on this call understands how committed we are to work together on behalf of the people of Greater Chicago. We are going to turn now to our first plenary session. And our first plenary session will include information about giving us a general overview of what type of funding opportunities are out there and a general sense of timeline. This is not a sprint. This process of distributing these funds will take place over months and a few years. But that type of general overview we thought would be incredibly important. And so if we could highlight Susie Park, Amar Rizky, and Jennifer Butler, our city, county, state partners, I'm going to let you guys kind of take it away.
Great. Thank you, Tina. I think I start this session. So good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here with everyone as we start off this meeting with a quick overview of the funding opportunities between the city, state, and county. My name is Susie Park. I serve as the budget director for the city of Chicago. Joining me on this panel are also Amar Rizky, who's the chief financial officer for Cook County, as well as Jennifer Butler, who is the deputy director of accountability and results for the state of Illinois Governor's Office of Management and Budget. If we can go to the next slide. So on the city side, so building off of some of the robust engagement that we did throughout our communities in preparation for the 2022 budget, we heard from many of our residents around what the priorities need to be as we think about 2022 and our investments. As a result of all of that engagement, we focused on a central theme for 2022 in our investments of investing to build a better Chicago by increasing safety and opportunities. And further from there, we broke down to 3 main priorities, which you're going to see that all of our investments centered around, which includes thriving and safe communities, equitable economic recovery, as well as essential government services. Next slide, please. So using these priorities as our guide, the city's 2022 budget supports roughly $1.9 billion in investments. Now, this total includes our ARPA funding, local funds, as well as our existing grant funds. But overall, you see that there's significant investment in many priorities throughout our city. Next slide, please. Great. So of that 1.9, $1.2 billion is what we have broken down into what we are calling the Chicago Recovery Plan. The Chicago Recovery Plan does take 2 main funding sources, which is our ARPA funding, as well as some local bond financing that we've used to also maximize, to also supplement our ARPA funding. As you see, these are resources that we are trying to deploy to respond to COVID-19 while also helping to drive a recovery in our hardest hit neighborhoods and industries and throughout our communities. So it is about $1.2 billion of spending over the next 3 to 5 years. There's much coordination going on between all of our city departments and many of the organizations that are joining us today. And like I said, they are broken down with 2 of the main funding sources are our ARPA funding as well as local bond financing. And then the next slide. So this really breaks down our Chicago Recovery Plan, and kind of what you see here are the big buckets across that plan. So this includes affordable housing, assistance to families, health and wellness, violence prevention, environmental justice, homeless supports and youth, in our thriving and safe community buckets, as well as in our equitable economic recovery bucket, funding for arts and culture, community climate investments, community development, parks and infrastructure, small business and workforce support, as well as travel and industry support. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amar to talk about the county's approach.
Good morning. Thank you, Susie. My name is Amar Risky. I am the county's chief financial officer. Just wanted to sort of walk through similarly just how the city did in terms of the county's approach to the overall funding that we've received from the federal government. The state and local fiscal relief fund, that's what that acronym stands for, is the exact fund that provided all this funding to state, local, and county-related areas that wanted to make sure that the federal government wanted to make sure that there's enough funding to support programs associated with that. And so under that fund, the county received about little over $1 billion. And the rules that the federal government has prescribed basically dictate that we commit this funding over a 3-year period and then spend it over a 5-year period. So what we've done is basically taken those funds and divided them into 2 big buckets. One, on the left, you see around $300 million is going to be spent on county operations to sustain some of the operations as we make our way through this pandemic, and ensure that we have adequate resources to support the programs and mandates that we currently do. But a bigger chunk of this on the right, as you see, $700 million, is going to be going into community-based programming, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide, but also in the afternoon in more detail. So overall, what we expect to see is that the county is going to take the initial allocation for fiscal year 2022 of $385 million. And what we've done is we've divided that up into these 5 policy pillars that is going to help us make sure that we are recovering from this pandemic in a more equitable and sustainable manner. Now, before we leave this slide, I just want to mention, a couple of years ago, the federal government provided CARES Act, which was immediate relief. So there was immediate relief where people were still struggling right away. We wanted to make sure that there was funding out there for that. Under the ARPA programming, the intention was to ensure that we are recovering now. So by definition, there's a longer term that we have to make sure that this funding is there for, and so that we can make sure that these impacts of these programs are more sustainable in the long run. And that's one of the reasons why we thought through a lot of this effort and ensured that each of these programs under these vital pillars that we have here, vital communities, safe and thriving communities, healthy, smart communities, and sustainable communities, to ensure that we're recovering as a region in a safe manner. Next slide, please. So in terms of more specific programming, what the county is planning to do, at least in the beginning of starting in fiscal year 2022, as we know, we're still in the midst of a pandemic. So there's a number of programs that we still want to continue to ensure there's support for. Things like vaccine incentives. There are a number of our patients that come to our health system, which is the largest public safety net hospital and system in our region, face homelessness and other loss of incomes. And so we want to make sure that there's enough funding there to support those programs, and specifically those patients that come to our doors with their healthcare needs. Additionally, behavioral and mental health has taken a big hit as part of this pandemic across the region, across the globe, actually. And so one of the things our health system will be doing is ensuring that we stand up a department of behavioral health, which will not only support the clinical programs that we offer, but also partner with community-based entities, many of you who may be on this call, to ensure that we have adequate support for mental health across our region, as well as in a sustainable manner. And then in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic that is a major crisis that we're all still facing from a public health perspective, there's a number of crises that are still going on out there. For example, opioid abuse, lead poisoning, and some of our major old areas that we have out there in our community. And so our public health department wants to ensure that we have adequate resources around education and outreach to continue to mitigate those crises as well. So the programming that you see in the Healthy Communities pillar speaks to a lot of those types of efforts that are still out there happening, and we want to make sure that there's support for those programs. Moving to vital communities, this is where, as you know, the public health crisis quickly turned into an economic crisis. And a number of our households and businesses suffered dramatically and are still suffering. And so we want to make sure that we have about $100 million allocation just in fiscal year 2022 towards a number of these initiatives that are going to help support our economically challenged areas. And so within that, I'll just highlight small business assistance. A number of our small businesses lost their customers, as well as had to now not only just lost their income, but also had additional expenses when it comes to the mitigation efforts. And so to help support a lot of our small businesses, we're standing up grants associated with that, along with supporting our households and social services, especially when it comes to some areas that are still struggling in our from an economic perspective. And so similarly, Safe and Thriving, a number of initiatives around violence prevention that you will see as a theme across all three units of government that we have here, making sure that we have assistance for justice-involved residents and make sure there's alternatives to incarceration and policing as well. On sustainable communities, if you have visited our southern regions, there's a number of areas that have an industrial past, and as a result, we have a lot of brownfields, as they like to call them in the environmental world, where there's a lot of waste, industrial waste in those grounds, and as a result, those properties cannot be used for any good use. And so we are hoping to start making a dent towards that by mitigating some of those efforts and returning those properties back to economic generating activities as well. So that's part of that pillar. And then smart communities, not just transportation, but water infrastructure. There's been a lot of flooding in a number of parts of our region, along with digital equity, which became a key piece there to make sure that there is broadband available for a number of our residents who still do not have that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to talk through some of the state remaining programs.
Thank you very much. The focus of my remarks is really taking it up another level to emphasize and tie out the importance of the parameters that the state and county and city are operating under with the use of these federal dollars. The ARPA funds, as have been discussed, were signed into law by President Biden in March of 2021. In May of the same year, U.S. Treasury guidance provided some additional parameters for the use of these funds under Section 9901. And this is also under the umbrella of the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. This funding provides financial support to state governments and the county and city as well, as has been addressed by the previous speakers. This allows us a multifaceted approach to respond to the COVID pandemic. ARPA funding is in addition to the coronavirus relief funding that was received under the CARES Act. So just to emphasize again, we are looking at unprecedented levels of federal funding that are available and that will be most successful when used in partnership with you, representatives of the grantee community, our community-based organizations. Next slide, please. Some of the allowable uses of this funding are articulated on this slide. And again, just to emphasize, the federal government through Treasury has communicated how these funds may be used. And so the initiatives, programming, and services that are being highlighted during this summit really all coincide with these parameters of use. The first is to respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. The second allowable use is to support workers performing essential services during the public health emergency. And this is really an emphasis on that premium pay component. The third use of these funds is for government services to the extent that a reduction in revenue was experienced directly by the COVID-19 public health emergency. And the last use of funds is to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the coming slides, particularly this afternoon. So how do we go about doing this? We know that the funds are limited, that we need to make the best use of these one-time dollars. And so at the state level and within the county and cities, we are reviewing the programs and the initiatives that are proposed to ensure that each effort aligns with Treasury's allowable uses. It's very important that these dollars are aligned appropriately so we don't get in a situation of disallowance later. These funds are generally subject to federal compliance requirements as specified in 2 CFR 200, and that will be addressed a little later in detail. We are also reviewing to make sure that as we enter into agreements, we're prepared to carry out and articulate reporting requirements that are also mandated at that federally level. So it's very important that the written agreements between the city, county, or state articulate all of those terms and conditions for transparency so that we can help you be successful carrying out those key programs. Next slide, please. As it relates to reporting and the execution of requirements, I want to draw your attention to the expenditure categories that are allowed under this ARPA funding. The expenditure categories must align to the program itself, and a program may have more than one expenditure category. The 7 categories that are listed on the screen are dictated at the federal level, and there may be specific performance reporting requirements tied to that category. So again, the terms and conditions of your grant agreement are the critical mechanism for communicating what you have to report on. So just to highlight the expenditure categories that align to the programs and services that are being funded, tied to public health, negative economic impacts, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay, infrastructure, revenue replacement, and administrative related expenditures. So that concludes my remarks, and as the slide indicates, we'll go to question answers next.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for that rich information. And again, just to remind
Muchas gracias por toda esa información.
that we will be placing these slides on the website on Monday. I'm not going to lie, my team's going to take a nap this weekend because we've been working hard to make this happen. But on Monday, we'll get this information up to you. It's too big to mail. Some of you have asked if we can just send it out. The deck is too big to mail. So, but now we've got about 10-15 minutes for Q&A for this particular panel. Please type the questions specific to this Q&A, if you could, in the Q&A box. We're trying to answer as many questions as we can, but if you have any questions about this ARPA overview plenary session, please do type them in the box now. And we are monitoring it. So here's a question. How is the funding broken down by percentages of Hispanic and African-American spending? I have an answer for that, but I don't know if it would be better for our panelists to respond. We don't, typically it's not broken down, right? By
Okay, I can jump in, Tina, too. So we don't have a percentage breakdown by race, but and I see another question here about equity. And so, one of the things that we are looking at for all of these funds is how it's equitably distributed. The crux underneath the ARPA funding specifically also requires, some equity lens to all of this funding. And I think Jennifer went through it with her slides. The crux of the ARPA funds is also COVID-19 impact, looking at, communities that have been vulnerable and most impacted by COVID-19 and how we are applying equity across how we are using those funds. So those are absolutely factors for which we are all looking at as we spend and award our ARPA funding. I don't know, Mar, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think that's exactly right. I think that is something that the U.S. government has required all of us to ensure that we're building through our programming, and that's one of the things that we're doing when it comes to the distribution of efforts to ensure that when we are targeting these programs towards those communities that are impacted the most from the pandemic or the economic impact, and so it'll look differently depending on the programs, obviously, and so. That is a process that we do envision undertaking to show that once the program's out in the streets, there's going to be metrics associated with that define, some of the demographic areas and impacts that we are looking to also ensure are being met. So that information will be made available, at least from the county. And I know the state and the city have similar needs and requirements and commitments to publicly display that too.
Yes, I agree from the state perspective. There are requirements on the front end in terms of targeting those populations and areas of focus. And there are also post-side requirements of ensuring that we met those targets. So the accountability is not just at the grantee level to ensure your programs and services are accomplishing as intended, but it's also at the state, city, and county level to ensure our objectives are in line.
Great. Tina, I don't know if I see a lot of questions about specific RFP programs. What I can say, and session 2 is going to really go into how you become a vendor, RFPs, all of that. So, I'm going to push some of those question and answers to the next session, because we are going to go through how do you become a vendor? How do you work with the city, state, and county requirements? I think both in all of our presentations, we did try to lay out the different buckets of funding and, the investment area. So it is pretty broad. We have funding set aside for youth programs, homelessness services, affordable housing. So as you see the presentation, and I know we'll post them, there are going to be multiple RFPs that are going to be available. Each of us have a website where all of those will be, but then we will bring those together into that Greater Chicago, I believe, site, so that you can also, so that they're in one place. But we also do each individually have funding websites where all of that funding opportunities will also be made available, if that's helpful.
Great. There's a question that asks, are there additional capacity building training or efforts which will assist or enable smaller grassroots organizations to access this funding? There will be other webinars and other events. But Susie, isn't there something in the funding itself that supports that?
So on the city side, we do have capacity building as an actual initiative. So we do have funding set aside for this. And as Tina mentioned, this is really a first step, but, definitely we're going to be working throughout, this whole period of really, helping to build capacity, technical assistance workshops to really get to some of the meat. We're going to present a lot of information today. I know it's going to be a lot, but we will also be doing separate capacity building workshops, as well as technical assistance to really help walk everyone through that. So don't worry, there's a lot of information, but we're also here to assist. So.
Yeah, no, I think I can also speak to that same commitment from the county side. I think that is part of the equity, programming that we want to try and make sure that we weave into this entire set of initiatives, because there's a number of agencies out there that they are doing great work, but may not have the full skill sets in terms of how to make sure the application is filled out, or some of the administrative support around reporting and compliance that is also required. And so, just as the mayor, the president, and lieutenant governor stated, we're going to be there with you as we, as you fill out those applications, as the programming, as the funds are awarded, and then continuing to ensure that the reporting that is being requested as part of these is also being met, because that is an important part of this entire set of things that we want to make sure that you are not, duplicating some of those resources and setting up those administrative costs that we can then bear for you. And so that is definitely an important element that we want to be able to build across the board. And each one of our programs will have that capacity building and technical assistance attached to it as well.
Great. There are a couple of questions that really go to the heart of the summit. And so I'll read the one from Letty Velez. Will disbursement hit new entrant applications and not the same nonprofit orgs that usually get funding at the outset? So
yes, I think, part of why, what we're doing with this Readiness Summit is really, we want to provide this opportunity far and wide. There will be RFPs and many opportunities coming out of these funds. And so, part of what we're doing here is a first step is really getting everyone ready so that, when these RFPs do come out, I know we have a couple out right now, but, that everyone knows, what to prepare in advance, that we are here to help you and answer any questions you may have, and that, people are getting things ready, the documents, the requirements that you're going to need. We're going to go through all of that today and moving forward so that, everyone is ready and, that these opportunities are available for all. So.
There is a question, and it's, there's a similar question earlier in the chat. Will ARPA funding be allocated to schools and school systems? And then I also had a question earlier in the Q&A about how does this apply? How does ARPA apply to municipalities? Is that something folks could answer?
I can speak to a little bit of that. So under the ARPA programming, all of our public school systems across the nation received their own specific set of funding, which were allocated through the state's education board towards the local school districts as well. So that is already there in terms of to help support specific public school and educational efforts. Now, there are definitely intersections between what a local unit of government, whether it's a municipality or a county, may do when it comes to, for example, behavioral health aspects of things where you want to make sure there's comprehensive set of services. So that's where there will be some collaboration between certain educational institutions and or a local municipality or county, for example, and the state. So there's going to be some of that intersection that's going to be played out. But the ARPA funding did provide some of that specific funding to the schools as well. Similarly, just like you have here, the state, the city, and the county, which are the three large units of government here in the state of Illinois, all the local units of government, all the smaller municipalities, the suburbs outside of Chicago, also received their own set of funding under ARPA as well. And they are looking to stand up some of those similar, maybe not to this scale, programs, in their own communities as well. So those are out there as well to help support not just the mandates that those institutions and units have, but also programming associated with similar efforts across the board. And so that is out there as well.
I would add that from a state perspective, whether it be state, county, or city, I think there is opportunity to read through posted funding opportunities and look at the eligibility criteria. If your organization is eligible, if it meets that criteria, then it should be considered. I would encourage you to be open-minded to the funding that's available. There are historic levels of funding out there. So don't assume that something is limited to a larger entity or an entity that has more history of performing these types of services. I would definitely be aware of available funding and do the due diligence necessary to ensure your organization is applying as appropriate.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're going to switch to the next panel, but I want to do another housekeeping thing. Lots of the questions were about specific areas of investment. And so I wanted to remind everyone that this afternoon, we're going to have tracks that are specifically focused on certain issue areas. And so as a reminder, track A is basically human services and community services, including violence prevention, workforce development, youth, senior, and homeless services, public health, including mental health. Track B is transportation and infrastructure. And so we'll have the departments of transportation and highways, some of our infrastructure departments, and also some of our environmental and sustainability programs will be there. And then track C is community development. If you care about housing, if you care about investments in neighborhoods, if you care about the arts, that is the track for you. And so I just wanted to remind everyone, those tracks start at 2 p.m. We will have specific Zoom links for each of those tracks. Track A will actually just stay here because that's the one that seems to have the most interest. But we have tracks for the other two, Zoom links for the other two tracks, which we'll provide later in the program. I also wanted to just acknowledge as a segue point, it's a question from Arturo Blake. I'm not going to answer it here, but I'm going to say I think the next program, the next session gets to it and that is, what is the initial process to begin? As I am completely new, what is the starting point? And I think we will get to that now on our plenary session 2, which is about eligibility. Thank you guys in session 1. And please, if you could look through the Q&A and there's anything that you can answer directly, please feel free to do that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tina. 2. Although I'm going to start session 2 too.
Oh, cool. And there you go.
Great. So thank you again. So, as I mentioned, the last session 2 is really going to get into a lot of the meat and potatoes. A lot of the questions I see in the Q&A around specific administrative questions around, how do we start? So I'm going to kick it off. If we can start with the next slide. We get a lot of questions about the flow of funding. if I'm a vendor versus a subrecipient. So, I did want to spend just a couple minutes going through this slide and the next one. So this is generally, and this applies to both the city, state, and county. Generally, how federal funds flow is, federal funds come directly either to the city, state, or county. That makes us the recipient. Sometimes we're also a pass-through. So, the state will get funding and then pass that through to other municipalities or the county. So we can also serve as a pass-through entity, which is what you see there in the lighter shade. Now, once we get the funding and when we put out different types of RFPs, generally people fall under two to three buckets. Here you see here is a contractor, which is really the vendor process, as well as a subrecipient, which, for the city would be a delegate agency. The real difference here is that, the contract is someone that provides a good or service to the recipient versus a subrecipient is someone that gets the federal funds as a sub. It's really a separate grant agreement and you're providing a service on our behalf. So if we go to the next slide, this provides a general checklist that we go through in the city and I'm sure the county and state to really determine kind of how, are you a vendor to our organization or are you a subrecipient? And this is directly from the Code of Federal Regulations. But really this is a checklist, that is available for everybody to kind of talk through, if you're, providing a service on our behalf, some of the nonprofits, some of our social services that you're kind of an extension of us, you would fall under that subrecipient versus a vendor who's, you're giving us a thing, a service to us, then you would fall, into that contractor vendor bucket. Moving to the next slide, I'm actually going to pass it to the state to really kick us off to Jennifer to talk about GATA requirements.
So as you may know, or learn today, the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act is the statute within the state of Illinois that helps us carry out grant requirements. GATA strengthens Illinois' grant-making programs by giving us a uniform process to comply with the federal requirements at 2 CFR 200. And in a previous slide, I mentioned that the ARPA funding and the other COVID-related funding generally applies to CFR 200. So the requirements of GATA assist in enabling you to carry out those same requirements for this COVID-related funding. GATA establishes uniform processes and templates to register so that we know who we're working with, who will be receiving funding, so that we have uniformity into how we apply and make funding decisions, the pre-award process, and also templates and structures on the post-award side in terms of an executed grant agreement and how we carry out the roles and responsibilities for reporting, for receipt of funds, through to the closeout of a grant. I think it's important to emphasize that the structures under Illinois' grants framework were driven by grantees. People like you wanted a consistent approach to how grants were administered. We are able to do that under the frameworks that Illinois has in place. These frameworks or rules are based on the federal requirements, so we're not doing more than the feds require us to do. And we're adding automation to the system so that we're able to complete requirements once and share it for all state agencies that are funding each of our grantees. Next slide, please. This is a visual that kind of walks you through the registration process. Our website is given on here, grants.illinois.gov, and the grantee portal is the grants side of the registration process. The very first step is to register with the state of Illinois as indicated by the far left dot. There is a registration form that includes 11 data fields, and I'm going to show you that in the next slide. This is a very straightforward way of just communicating who you are so that we can go to the third bullet of performing the verification against federally required SAM.gov. The SAM.gov website is a federal clearinghouse that allows us to do some verifications that are required to be sure we know who we're doing business with. It's a way to protect you as the grantee doing business with the city, state, or county. And it's also a way for us to have awareness of any history that you might have regarding the use of public funds. The fourth bullet is emphasizing the qualified status. The next screen is going to show what that looks like. And based on the system verification that's done, any points that need to be addressed to ensure you're in a qualified status to do business with the state of Illinois, those are flagged for ease of working with the right resources to address those short-term areas. And the last piece of the registration process is the internal control questionnaire, or ICQ. Those of you who may have done business with the state before may have some familiarity with the ICQ. I will tell you that we are in the process of revising that to simplify it. It will continue to be available through the grantee portal on our website. It is a federal requirement that we look at and understand the risk posed by the entities that we pass funding to, so that we can provide technical assistance, capacity building, and support to enable you to be as successful as possible. So that ICQ is really a key piece of helping inform our state agencies and others who are giving funding so that they can work with you to make sure you are successful and you have the supports that you might need. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of two pieces of information that I talked about on the previous slide. On the left, you see that we have a registration screen. This screen includes the 11 pieces of information that are required. Very basic. When you register with the state of Illinois, this is the information that you need to have to fill out your registration. The organization type, the third piece of information, will determine whether or not you are required to be registered with the Secretary of State. If your organization type does not require Secretary of State registration, then that Secretary of State file ID field is not required. And again, we'll be available to provide additional supports regarding this on a one-on-one basis. The second half of the slide shows the pre-qualification status. As I said before, once you have registered, once you've completed the information on the left side of the screen, the system does the verification and it will return to you this pre-qualification status. The example showing all of the requirements are in good status. If anything is flagged as needing additional intervention or help, that remediation button to the right will allow you connect with the right resources to get the support you need to address and resolve your particular problem. So again, this registration and the pre-qualification status, I hope you can see, are straightforward and automated tools that we will assist you with as you become set up in the systems to become a grantee with the state of Illinois. Next slide. This is a snapshot of the grant application and award process. And just to quickly step through this, in the notice of grants, you will see that one of the first steps is the posting a notice of funding opportunity, or NOFO, in the Catalog of State Financial Assistance, the CSFA. CSFAs are listed on our website at grants.illinois.gov. If a recipient is named either in enacted legislation or by statute, then there is not a requirement for it to be competitively let. So if there is competition for an award, there will be a notice of funding opportunity. In the competitive review, the grantee is submitting applications in response to that NOFO, and the state agency is reviewing and evaluating those applications to make an awarding decision. The third step is the award process, and our state agencies will be submitting a notice of state award through the grantee portal, letting the grantee know the terms and conditions of that award. Again, there are post-award requirements such as reporting that have to be done as a condition of the award. This gives the grantee an opportunity to be informed about those conditions so they can make the right decision to move forward with that grant agreement. And the last step is the funding, and that's probably what all of you are most encouraged about. Once the agreement is finalized, the programs and services can begin, and the payments can begin flowing pursuant to the terms and conditions of the grant agreement. Next slide. All right, I'm going to turn it back to my colleagues for more detail on the county level of funding opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Dean Constantino. I'm the Deputy CFO for Cook County. And we're going to talk about some of the funding opportunities that the county has available for different organizations and groups and individuals as part of the ARPA program. Really, there's three buckets that we have. We've got, sub-grants to subrecipients, procurements and contracts that go out to vendors. And then you have beneficiary or payments that go out to individuals and organizations. So just to kind of give you some examples, an example of a subrecipient group and would be like a partner to support county in managing the distributions of funds for utility assistance programs. Procurement or a contract, I think we're all familiar what those are, but like an example would be a construction company hired to build additional lab facilities in schools. And then beneficiary payments are fundings distributed to small businesses and industry heavily impacted by the pandemic. So I think Susie did a really good job of kind of like sussing out the difference between, what's a subrecipient, who's a vendor, who's a contractor in one of our previous slides. And so I won't get into too much detail there, but if you could go on to the next slide, talk a little bit about subrecipients. So as part of the subrecipients, this is going to be largely not-for-profit organizations, other types of local governments. There'll be an evaluation process the county does, and then we'll award that subgrant to a particular organization. We, of course, will be looking at, taking equitable lens there, or providing technical assistance as part of our awarding process. Once the award is provided, we'll be doing monitoring and doing performance evaluations. And in the event that we need to see any possible fraud, waste, or abuse, then we must intervene, adjust records to remove unallowable costs, and take other actions as necessary. If we go on to the next slide, please. So doing business with the county, this is your standard kind of RFP and bidding process that we do with all vendors. In order to do that, you need to register online, receive email. You can receive email alerts with new procurement activities. We've got bid documents on there. We do have a one-pager that will get distributed with these slides. We'll give you links to where you can find all this information. And we've got instructional videos on how to register with the county. Once you've kind of identified a procurement or an RFP or a bid that you wanted to make, you can submit your bids online. And then if the bid is awarded, we'll do all the regular stuff, establish, contracts and so forth. And then we have different types of procurement methods depending on the value of the contract. And that's all kind of laid out in our procurement codes and records, which will be available on the link. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have beneficiaries. And so, a beneficiary, in order to become a beneficiary, we got to look at a number of different things. We'll probably do some sort of eligibility tracking. So, and if you think about it, I mean, really, there's a lot of different programs that will be providing benefits to different organizations, individuals, and it'll be kind of like a case-by-case basis. But so there'll be some examples. So we'll look at income as a percentage of median income or poverty level when we're making our eligibility determinations. And then once we've done that, we'll require the individual or group to provide, certain levels of documentation, so a valid state or federal ID, a W-2, most recent utility bill, and then we'll receive benefit. And then once they've kind of provided that information, the benefits will be distributed. And we'll have to work with you, kind of post hoc and say, okay, what's your current employment status or business status? Because we're going to want to track all that information. And so on the right, what you see is some sample beneficiary programs that have been approved, grants to small business programs, assistance for mortgage assistance, rental assistance, and so forth. And all of that information will be available on the county's website. And made available to the public as those programs get laid out. Next slide. So I'll hand it back over to, this is Jennifer to talk about, or to Susie, who will talk about general city requirements for subrecipients. Thank you.
Susie, are you jumping in, or are we going to Q&A?
Sorry, I'm passing this to LaToya to talk about general city requirements.
Wonderful.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is LaToya Vaughn. I'm the Deputy Budget Director here with the City of Chicago's Office of Budget and Management. We assist various departments with managing their federal, state, public and private grant programs. And the next two slides that we're going to go over is really a reiteration of the general life cycle of a grant, really focused on preparing organizations for and getting them ready for how to apply. And this might be relevant in general for city opportunities, state opportunities, as well as county opportunities. We're also going to walk through the life cycle of a grant just to give you an understanding of where to start and where to go from after you've received a grant. So the first, back to the previous slide. The first things that I want to talk about are just making sure that your organization has the basic requirements that you need to get started for applying for a grant. That means that you want to make sure that you have the basic organizational structure in place. You have the financial reporting systems in place. You have policies and procedures in place to govern the financial management and programmatic management, as well as administration of all of your programs. You want to make sure you have your organizational information and identification numbers. So your federal employee identification number, your DUNS number, or your SAMS number. I know they are moving into SAMS registration primarily. You want to make sure you have access into those systems like grants.gov or login.gov or GATA or the county's website or the City of Chicago's iSupplier website. So you want to make sure you have access into those systems and you can and you have all of your necessary organizational information prepared and ready and updated and active. Just some background, you want to make sure you don't have any debt or any debarment statuses. If so, you want to get those cleaned up and prepared to go. So you want to make sure you have good standing within those organizations that you plan on applying for. Also making sure that you have your articles of incorporation, that you have a board of directors. Depending on the different programs that you are going to apply for, you want to make sure that you are going to be prepared to have adequate insurance. You want to make sure that you disclose all of your economic statuses within that organization or any partnerships within that organization. You want to also make sure that you have financial record keeping practices and you have financial statements or tax statements that you're going to need to make available for different types of evaluations of risk and such. If you have personnel associated, you want to make sure you have a cost allocation plan to make sure you're adequately charging all the costs appropriately across the different programs. The next slide is really focused on the general life cycle of a grant. And so this next slide, sorry, you can go to the next. Thanks. This next slide is really to give a good picture of the entire flow of the process from start to finish. The first step that we just talked about is really making sure you have an organizational structure, making sure you have access to the systems, making sure your organizational codes and identifying numbers are in place. And then the next step is really understanding the requirements of that grant program. So you want to do your due diligence, you want to do your research. Each platform might be different. So the state's platform is GATA. You definitely want to make sure you understand the requirements of the GATA system and of the individual granting agencies so that you can prepare and collaborate and get ready for submission of your proposal. For the City of Chicago, we have iSupplier, and on the iSupplier website, we have a host of materials to help you get ready for the administrative process on how to log into the system, how to make sure that you're in good standing, also how to apply for different grant programs, how to use the system, and then we talk through we provide information on invoicing. So you want to make sure that you understand the requirements up front and that you're prepared to write a persuasive and a good proposal that's going to make it through to award. So then you go into the actual application. That's your RFP solicitation phase. It could be an invitation only. It could be an open and competitive solicitation. But in any instance, you want to make sure that you are ready to apply for that program and that you attend those technical assistance sessions that the departments are offering. I know in those technical assistance sessions, you get to ask specific questions about your programs, about the budget, about the resources that might be needed, or any collaborations that you're going to have to leverage in order to booster up your proposal so that you can deliver those services. Also, some just key things you want to ask for: if there are templates available so you don't have to start from scratch, make sure that in those technical assistance sessions that you are being very active and asking for those types of resources so you don't have to recreate a lot of things that may already exist. After you've submitted your application, the departments are going to go through an evaluation and selection process. After that evaluation and selection process, if you are awarded a contract, then you're going to go into the actual award and agreement process. That's what we call the contract execution. After that, you guys are going to go into program implementation. As you're implementing the program and ongoing, the city and all of our entities are likely going to be doing compliance checks to make sure that these programs are in alignment with the scope of service and with the agreement and intended upon services. So as you are implementing your program, then you're going to start invoicing and getting reimbursed for those services that you are providing. In that process, you should be tracking outcomes, and in that you should be also working with the department to make sure you have the appropriate tracking instruments and technology that you might need to record all of your outcomes, all of your spending, to make sure that you are being compliant with that grant program. And then after you've invoiced and received all of your reimbursements, the next phase is going into final reporting, closeout, and auditing. And that is where you want to make sure at that point, all of your information from start to finish has been appropriately recorded, and record keeping is adequate. And also that you are being compliant throughout the life of that grant, because the auditors will come in and ask you for information for different types of expenditures. In some cases, you have to receive an audit. If you receive over $750,000, you are definitely going to get audited. And so just knowing the criteria, knowing the things that the auditors are going to look for, because when you supply that information as an organization, it goes to the recipient to report that up to the federal government. So the layers of compliance are really strong and really is dependent on your internal controls. And so that's basically the life cycle of a grant and what to expect when you're applying for programs and how to implement a grant program. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand it off to the next person.
Thanks, LaToya. Good morning, everybody. My name is Reshma Soni. I'm the comptroller for the city. Wanted to go through some other points of entering into contracts or entering into subrecipient agreements, delegate agency agreements with the city. So in the past, we've seen that advancing funds is something that we've had interest in. A lot of our organizations, especially the smaller organizations, may need some mobilization funds or funds to be able to carry out the actual project or program that's under the subrecipient agreement. So to address the needs of those subrecipient agreements or delegate agencies who do not have sufficient capital, the city is in the process of issuing a delegate agency advance policy. This is something that the mayor touched on this morning. We are rolling this out in phases in about 7 different programs right now, and we'll be rolling it out further. But just sort of the core of this advance agreement would be that we're going to provide advance funding based on following criteria. And it's that the organization is under some kind of financial hardship. And we'd be asking for a signed self-attestation form and tax forms to be able to establish that financial hardship need, and that the funds would not exceed 25% of the annual spend that's anticipated on that program. So if you have a multi-year contract, we'd be looking at 1 year, seeing what the advance would be. And again, the idea is to be able to provide funding and some mobilization for those institutions that want to apply, but are worried of the fact that they may not have enough funds to float as they're waiting for reimbursement from the city. So this is something that we're really excited about. The next slide, please. We also wanted to talk through payment plan options for city debt. So some of you may have debt that's owed to the city, either individual or for your business, and that may have been a deterrent for applying for any kind of contract or a delegate agency agreement with the city. As many of you may be aware, that we do have a requirement that we have to be in compliance with any outstanding debt. But we have some new programs that have been implemented over the last year and would like to talk about that so everyone is aware. But we have multiple programs that are here for payment plans. One is the Business Recovery Payment Plan as a pilot that's going on until June 30th of this year. And what it is any business that has any debt outstanding, whether it's administrative hearing debt, water debt, or anything that's related to the business, we can put you on a payment plan up to a period of 60 months. The down payment for the payment plan is $25, so it's very low to be able to just get into compliance. And as soon as you get onto the payment plan, you are thought of as compliant at that point, and your grant agreement or your contract can go through, and you just have to keep up with the payments that have been structured. And that's something the Department of Finance can help you with. We also have programs for administrative hearing debt, parking and camera enforcement debt, and utility billing debt. Again, same thing, $25 down. We look at your overall debt and we can put you on a payment plan up to anywhere from 36 to 60 months, depending on the debt. But these options are available, and we can provide these options to the group or send out an email explaining how you can apply for these things. The other portions of this are debt forgiveness. So currently we have a program that we started about 20 months ago called the Utility Billing Relief Program, and it's for eligible individuals who have their their income that is at 200% of the federal poverty level or lower for their household. And what this utility billing relief program does is it basically takes any debt that you owe for water, sewer, and water sewer tax and puts it aside, any past due debt, and your current amounts that you will be paying for your charges would be at 50% off for a period of a year. And as long as you make those payments for a period of a year, then we're able to waive off any past debt that you've had. This program is really successful. We have about 17,000 applicants so far. In total, we've waived off about 16 million, either in set aside debt or actually waived off debt. And on average, it's saving households about $1,100. So it's definitely a great program where you can get forgiveness. And then a new program that we have coming up is our Clear Path Relief Pilot Program, or known as CPR. This program will be starting in Q2 of 2022, and it provides payment relief and also debt forgiveness for parking and parking compliance related tickets. So you received a speed ticket, red light, maybe a parking violation. Again, the program is very similar, that we look at the last 3 years of your debt. We take off any penalties or interest that have been charged on that debt. So it's at a base level, and we put that on a payment plan for 12 months. And as long as you make those payments on time for 12 months, any debt that you have older than 3 years will be completely wiped off. Again, it's related to parking. We're looking at other types of debt as well as we continue our tranche of fines and fees reforms that the mayor has been pushing for the last 2 years. But this is something we're very excited about because we know that this will help a lot of individuals to remove the debt, and hopefully that is not a deterrent or a barrier for you to be able to apply for any kind of grant funding or any contracts with the city. I'll pass it along to Eileen.
Le paso la palabra a Aileen.
Thank you. Actually, Shauna Sims will handle this
Gracias.
portion of the presentation.
Shana va a estar a cargo de esa parte.
Hi, how are you? Good morning. My name is Shauna Sims Davis. I'm the Deputy Procurement Officer for Government Affairs and Community Engagement with the Department of Procurement Services. For the city of Chicago, known as DPS, which is an acronym you will hear us say several times during this presentation. I'm here with my Chief Procurement Officer, Eileen, and the Deputy Procurement Officer, Jackie Charleston, with our certification and compliance team. Today, we will discuss contracting, certification, and compliance. The first slide, here at DPS, we work in partnership with our user departments to guarantee a transparent and fair process. We want to start off giving you information regarding our vendor registration using iSupplier, which will be a very important component in this process. For all purchasing activities, you must be registered as a vendor in the iSupplier system, which will allow you to view and respond to bids, view orders, payments, invoices, past and present, and update your company's information if ever needed. We do ask that you allow 3 days after you register to receive your vendor code. Next slide, please. In upcoming slides, we will discuss the types of procurement, which are competitive bids, requests for proposals, and requests for qualifications. Next slide. Competitive bidding and procurement. Competitive bidding is a procurement method whereby a contract is awarded to the lowest, or in the case of revenue generating contract, the highest responsive and responsible bidder. They are advertised on our DPS website through our DPS alerts and the Chicago Tribune newspaper in the classified section. Next slide, please. When completing a competitive bid, we require you fill in all required information, have all bid documents requested, and be sure to have all documents with the bid packages signed and notarized to make sure your bid isn't rejected. Having a completed package is important when submitting and uploading all documents into iSupplier e-procurement system. Please note, performance bonds may be required for construction bids. Next slide, please. All bids must be timely during the bid opening date, which means 1 minute later, and we will not accept your bid. Again, please remember all bids are submitted electronically through the city's iSupplier e-procurement system. Next slide. It's important to remember bid opening days are Monday through Friday, except holidays, and happen at 11 a.m. for competitive bids and 4 p.m. for RFPs and RFQs. Next slide. The award process is determined by the bidder's responsiveness and responsibility for award and awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder meeting in the city's specifications. Request for proposals, or reference as RFP, is a form of procurement that is typically used to solicit proposals to implement a new project requiring professional services. Contracts awarded for RFP are made to the highest rated and ranked respondents. Next slide, please. Lastly, our request for qualifications, or reference as a RFQ, is a form of procurement that is used to solicit qualifications from companies who possess a high degree of technical expertise and knowledge in specific disciplines. RFQs are commonly used for the A&E contracts and certain categories of consulting. The city pre-qualifies companies to build a vendor pool to respond to future orders. This is our short snippet of doing business with the city of Chicago, but for this process, what's the most important is that you log into iSupplier system and register as a vendor if you have intentions on viewing and responding to bids, orders, or payments, both past and present. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jackie Charleston, to speak more about certification and compliance.
Thank you, Shauna. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Charleston, Deputy Procurement Officer for Certification and Compliance. Minority participation goals are applied to all contracts over $10,000. Federally funded projects require a disadvantaged business goal, also known as DBE. All DBE goals are set on a contract-specific basis. Next slide, please. In order for a prime to receive credit, the sub must be DBE certified by the City of Chicago, Chicago Transit Authority, Metro, PACE, and the Illinois Department of Transportation. All 5 of these firms make up what is called the Illinois UCP. Next slide, please. There are several ways to achieve compliance. The most common way is by subcontracting a portion of the work to one or more DBE firms that will perform a commercial useful function directly related to the project, or by purchasing materials that will be used in the performance of the contract. Next slide, please. After contract award and throughout the life of the contract, utilization of all DBE subcontractors that were listed on the compliance plan is monitored on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. Also, throughout the life of the contract, prime contractors are required to submit monthly audits that show payments that have been made to all DBE subcontractors performing on the project. A quarterly report of those payments is also required. Also, the prime contractor and all subs are required to submit weekly certified payrolls on all construction projects. When the contract is complete and the contract is being closed out, all firms that performed on the project must submit waivers of lien. Next slide, please. To get more information on bid opportunities, awarded contracts, payments, and anything Sean and I spoke about today, please visit the link that is shown on your screen. Next slide, please. Follow us on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Thank you.
All right, that was a lot of information. So one quick thing that I would ask, I know, Shauna, you talked about iSupplier. Jackie, you just talked about a link on the website. I'd like you guys to either, if you could send those links to us, we'll put them in the chat, because obviously people can't click on links on here. So, and any other links that people have mentioned, please send them, put them in the Q&A if you're a panelist, and we will get them into the so that folks can see those links, access those links. We will also be sending out after this event a follow-up email to everyone who registered. We will not be able to send the PowerPoints because the files are too big, but those will be posted. But we will send out the links and other information that may have shown up. And again, we'll be posting Q&As and recordings on the Chicago, I'm not going to say it because I say it wrong, greaterchicagotogether.com, and also on the City of Chicago's website for us, because I know how to be bossy and tell people in the city, please put this up. So many questions came up. I've been trying to group them, but one, I'm going to sort of channel my experience when I was in the nonprofit world. Latoya, you went through, people needed a DUNS number, SAM's number, EIN number, this number, articles of incorporation, board of directors, all those things. Some of the small organizations on here don't even know what the heck you're talking about. And so where do you get a DUNS number? How do you get a SAM's number? EIN, I know, go to irs.gov, they'll give it to you right away. You know, and those sorts of people don't even know like what we're talking about. And I do want to tell folks on this call, we are going to do a more intensive conference that is really going to walk through with folks these very, very basic questions. But I just was like, I'd have been overwhelmed. So Latoya, can you comment?
Oh, yes. So the county has a good version of this in like a one-pager, and we'll also work to prepare something to post on our iSupplier website. DUNS is duns.com. SAMS is sam.gov. Ultimately, the federal government is going to be moving in away from DUNS and into sam.gov. So make sure you guys are registering there. Your articles of incorporation you can get from the state of Illinois. The IRS will give you your FEIN number. Once again, all this information we'll make available to this group, and we'll also post on the iSupplier website. In order to get access into the city's portal, you want to register through the iSupplier website, and we'll also make that available. If you are applying for other state programs, you want to make sure that you apply through the GATA portal. And so we'll make sure that you guys get a comprehensive list from the state's perspective, the county's perspective, as well as the city's perspective. But the basic organizational structure for getting and requiring your articles of incorporation, having a board of directors, making sure that you have your financial systems and policies and procedures in place in accordance with 2 CFR. Also making sure that you have your FEIN number and all those critical organizational basic requirements. We will make sure that you have a one-pager to help navigate through that process.
Great, thank you, Latoya, because one of the things I don't, as much as in the city in particular, we're working on looking on ways to streamline, reform, and eliminate red tape. There are going to be some basics that are going to be needed. And so what we want to help, especially the smaller organizations, do is to get ready, figure out how you set yourself up formally. And similarly, Jackie, you mentioned, becoming a minority or a disadvantaged business entity. There's a process for that as well. And Jackie, forgive me, I don't know if we're going to have time to go through that process, but I think it's important that we give that information out to people and not just, I'm a lawyer, it's called a legal conclusion. It's like we go to this is what you need without telling people how to get there. So if we could get a one-pager on that and others, that would be great.
Bettina, one more thing I forgot to mention, I'm sorry. And I know this might or might not be known across different people, but under some of the programs that we do fund organizations like Sunshine Enterprise, where they do help small businesses get developed, and they do that from start to finish. So we do have a lot of our subrecipients that currently provide those services, and they are absolutely looking for people to sign up and be a part of those types of organizations to help you get started. So those are some good resources that we can also help you guys identify. Those will help a lot of the startup organizations just get the basic organizational structure, develop your business plan, and get access to capital.
No, and in fact, I want to encourage everybody to come to the afternoon plenary session, especially if you're a really new startup without a big financial history or record. We're going to have 3 leading organizations that also help nonprofits and small businesses. And that's going to get me to another question. Jackie, you wanted to say something real quick?
Yes, I will put in the chat the link to, excuse me, the link to all of the certification requirements. And also DPS does a workshop once a month, and we have one coming up on February 9th of how to become certified. And I will also share that information in the link.
Wonderful, thank you. There is a question about what the heck, it's another one of those legal conclusions, sort of. A delegate agency, I thought County explained this so well, and others, that a delegate agency is basically an extension of the arm of the city, county, or state. You're helping us do our work, and that's why you're a delegate agency. You usually get that way by being a sub-recipient. And so people are asking, what's a delegate agency? What's a sub-recipient? Dean, you were the one that really nailed it. So can you just elaborate more on delegate agency, sub-recipient? Do you have to be a nonprofit to be a sub-recipient or a delegate agency? Are there for-profits that can get serve that role?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think, really Susie had the best slide on the difference between a subrecipient and I guess a contractor, but a delegate agency, I guess, would be like a form of a subrecipient. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and so you don't have to be a nonprofit to be a subrecipient, although most tend to be nonprofit.
Yeah, they mostly tend to be, right? Like one of the big kind of indication is, are you turning a profit? Right. And, if you're turning a profit, then you're most likely a subrecipient. If you're not turning a profit, you're probably a subrecipient. If you're turning a profit, you're probably just a vendor procurement contractor.
And then the question in the other way, and you can be a nonprofit and apply for a vendor contract. Yes?
Yes.
I've got Post-its everywhere, people. Reshma, you mentioned the outstanding debt issue, and someone asked, where do we go to check to see if we have outstanding debt? And then again, if we could have the website where people would go for that, we'll put it in the chat.
Yep, sounds good.
Coolest question. Well, there are lots of cool questions. Going through my Post-its. Okay, this one is, when will RFPs be available and announced, and where should people look? So can you guys remind people how that's going to work?
This is Susie. I can start. The RFPs are going to be rolling. So, between now and this year and into next year, it will be rolling. The city is posting, and I know the county has a site and the state has a site. The city has a specific, outside of the procurement website also, which is we will also double post there, but we also have a specific chicago.gov/recovery plan, which we'll put in the chat, where all of our ARPA funded RFPs will go, both for delegates and for vendors. And then I think Tina is the intent to merge those all into that greater Chicago recovery also. So there will be lots of places where we're going to share this information, but it is rolling. The city I know has a couple out right now, but the majority of them are coming. So just be on the lookout, sign up for these sites so that you can get notifications when things are coming out, but that will be rolling throughout the year.
Likewise for the state of Illinois, our site, I shared in the chat, it is on the CSFA of the GATA resource in the GATA website, which is grants.illinois.gov. And again, the opportunities are posted by the state agency. So when those state agency cycles hit for the grant awards to be released as an opportunity to apply for, that will come through the CSFA.
Yeah, same here. We've got a county website where our procurements are posted, and our RFPs are posted. Those will come out as the programs are developed. Again, we're kind of just like Susie. We're rolling them out, as they come. So just keep your eyes peeled there. And all that information, again, will be on the one pager. I'll send the specific link for that question.
The reason I think it's so important for people to understand it's rolling is because some really new organizations are on this call, and I want them to know that they're going to have time to get ready so that they'll be eligible for some of these opportunities. Okay, this was one of the there's another basic, but it's the reimbursement issue. I know that the city announced with the mayor and Reshma, our comptroller, mentioned there's going to be some cash advancing that we hope we'll be able to do, at least pilot on some of these grants. But for the most part, are most of the grants still going to be reimbursement style grants?
Yes, so currently most of the grants are reimbursement style. We are trying to put in some language for expedited reimbursement. So if you have a grant where you have to put out a stipend of a payment or some set amount that you're putting out to individuals, we are looking at creative ways of doing that, like doing expedited reimbursements.
Great. Okay, these are the ones that I like, my favorite questions. Can I apply for funding from all three levels of government?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Sorry, say that one more time.
So one of the panelists asked, will we be able to apply for funding for all three levels of government? Say there's probably something similar.
Yes. Yes, and there's caveats in the sense that you want to make sure that your programs are distinct, right? So if you have a population of individuals or an area that you're serving, you have to make sure that the grant either allows you to be able to sort of stack up, but you cannot submit the same expenditures to all three different agencies. The expenditures you're submitting have to be different. So, there's a 1-for-1.
No double dipping.
Double dipping or triple in this case.
There are several questions and suggestions in the Q&A. One was for creating some type of clearinghouse for just everything could be for all levels of government, just a different way of doing business altogether. Another asked if there could be a uniform application process or some type of centralized process. Can you all comment on why, what we can do to streamline and coordinate it, and why, and what we can't do? Because I know we have challenges just within the city, making our processes singular. So I don't know what we could do across entities, but I think it's a fair point. You guys a comment on it?
So in terms of, within the city itself, we are looking to streamline all of the documentation. So if you're a delegate agency, let's say that works with multiple different departments within the city, let's say it's, health and as well as DFSS, which is family and support services, we're looking to streamline that documentation. So it's the same flow and you know exactly what you need to submit for all those agencies. And hopefully you can just sort of copy and paste and submit as long as the formats are similar. So that's one thing we're looking at. I think from an overall, agency perspective, because of the fact, and I'll let the state and the county speak as well, the state has a lot of their own direct grants, and then may have their own processes that they need to follow for federal grants. We might be a subrecipient of a state, so we might have an additional layer, let's say, that we have to follow. So those are the kind of things that might make it difficult to be able to sort of do a one size fits all. But with that said, we are looking at getting assist agencies and all sort of up to speed on what we're doing here and what we're using ARPA funding for, so that hopefully they will be able to help you throughout all the different types of grants available in all three streams of government.
Anyone else want to comment on that? So one, I want to just thank this panel. I knew that this was going to be the panel that generated the most sort of interest, and the lots and lots of questions, which we again will be copying and following up. If you want to look at the questions yourselves, please look at them and feel free to answer them in the Q&A yourself right away. But I want to thank you for this really terrific panel. I think we have one plenary left, which is about compliance and reimbursement. And so we will switch now to our final plenary panel for the morning. And a lot of you all are all going to stay on. So let's just carry on. Who's kicking off?
I believe that's me. So you can go to the next slide. We've spent a lot of time kind of thinking about reporting and compliance. I think everyone on this panel really has spent a lot of time thinking about the reporting requirements. And rightfully so. The people on this panel have received, or the organizations on this panel received, about $11 billion in ARPA funding. That's almost the equivalent of one US made aircraft carrier. So the federal government is going to be looking at this very closely on how the money is spent and what the outcomes are. So we have a real opportunity to demonstrate value here. Our hope is that by accurately reporting the outcomes and demonstrating the success of these programs, we can secure future federal funding that can be passed back down to the community. So we'll be relying heavily on for-profit and not-for-profit partners to provide information that we need to prove the success of these programs. Now, this slide just demonstrates the way that I think we're all thinking about the reporting. There's a compliance component that's associated with it. So we need to provide data for reporting according to the Treasury categories that were mentioned earlier on. And so that includes providing performance indicators and programmatic data, project demographic distributions, and also evidence-based interventions. Now, an evidence-based intervention is kind of like almost like a placebo or a second case. In some of the programs that we need to provide reporting on to the Treasury, we need to show the outcomes for a group that has received a benefit, and then show the outcomes for a group that hasn't seen benefit. And I think that's really telling of how the federal government is really looking at these funds. What they're really trying to do is establish how these programs and the outcomes of these programs how the investments really help the community and what the impacts are. And so we're really going to need to work with our partners to make sure that we gather as much information as we can to really demonstrate that value. We also have, both the city, the county, and the state. I mean, we also have our own constituents that we need to provide performing. We have our own kind of ways that we need to collect, adherence to our own performance metrics. We also need information to help us with decision making. And so we'll be requiring non-for-profit and for-profit organizations to provide us all sorts of information. Primarily, the reason we need some of this information is to make sure that the programs are working in a way and that the outcomes that we expected are being achieved. If those outcomes aren't being achieved, then we may need to redirect funding to a different location or a different program that's achieving better results. And then finally, we have kind of the public reporting requirements. So this is, transparency, transparency, transparency. What we're really looking to do here is, the federal government requires us. They're requiring us to provide all the information on a public website, and the county is committed to that. No other, we are in the beginning stages of setting up a dashboard in the county for public consumption that will track the progress, outcomes, expenditures of the ARPA funds. So our nonprofit and for-profit partners and even our beneficiaries may be asked to provide additional levels of information to help us achieve those goals. So this is a funding opportunity from the federal government, unlike that we've really ever seen. So no other federal program has provided such latitude in local governments to determine the way funding can be used. We'll be relying heavily on everyone on the call here to make sure that we can demonstrate value and prove to the federal government that this is not a gamble, because local and state governments know the best way how to spend funding to impact recovery in the region. So next slide, please. So because of the things that I just mentioned, having appropriate internal controls in place is going to be very important. A lot's at stake. So beyond the CFR guidelines that we kind of discussed earlier today, we need to, we're going to be asking you all to maintain certain internal controls. That means having written policies and procedures for informal documentation, having written standards of conduct, making sure that you're evaluating your risk and monitoring it, and maintaining records accordingly. So with that, I think I've got a link at the bottom of the slides. Shows the compliance and reporting guidelines provided by the federal government to give you an idea what we may need. So with that, I'll pass it on to the next panelist. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else going to be sharing some insights here?
Yes, and so this is Reshma again. I just want to go through some of the uniform guidance. So as Dean was mentioning, that we do have the requirements under the uniform grant guidance that we have to follow. The funding that we're getting, all of this ARPA funding, or whether it be rental assistance or homelessness or other types of funding that we have, is being driven by the federal uniform grant guidance. And in that guidance, we are required, being the recipient, and then for you all being the subrecipients of the funding, that we follow the financial management discussion. So I want to make sure that we just go through this a bit. We don't have to go too much in detail, but just to get an idea what they're looking for. And this is what happens every year when we get audited, or if your grant receipts are more than 750,000 in a given year when you might get audited. We need to make sure that we're identifying all of the federal awards received and what was expended, and the federal programs in which they were received. So we have to make sure that we're keeping track of the different expenses. Now, how this impacts you is that if you're getting funding or if you're getting grants from different pools of grants, like let's say you have money that you're getting for doing some kind of vaccine work, and you're getting money for Head Start, let's say as an example, we need to make sure that those expenditures are split out when they're submitted to us and they're not commingled, because every federal granting agency and every federal award has different rules. We need to make sure that reporting is accurate and complete. all of the financial results are complete and reported accurately. So again, we need to make sure that all of you are keeping accurate reports when you're submitting expenses to us and the accurate supporting documentation, so we're able to show that those expenditures actually are allowable under the grant. We need to make sure that the records that identify the source and application for federally funded activities, and that's something we do internally to make sure we're splitting out the different types of federal funds we're receiving. Effective control is extremely important throughout the process. Again, checks and balances, as Tina mentioned, we can't double dip, so need to make sure about that as well. And then comparison of expenditures with budget amounts for each federal award. Again, this is where we have our teams come in. We set up budgets with all of you when we're doing the delegate agency award process. Those budgets may change for whatever reason. Maybe you need more personnel than non-personnel. That's something that needs to be discussed before the expenditures are submitted. If you see during that process, you're doing your program, the changes need to be made. You need to talk to the agency you're dealing with or the department you're dealing with, and then submit an updated or revised budget that needs to get approved before the expenditures are actually submitted. We see that here there are reasons where payments may take longer to be made just because we don't have those updated budgets, and then we're not able to match up the actual expenses to the budget. So that's really important. Written procedures to implement payment requirements. So we internally have written procedures, but we need all of you to at least have some process, whether it's bullet points or just a flow chart or some steps to be able to show how are you making payments and how are you checking documents that you're receiving before you submit it to us. And then written procedures for determining the allowability of costs. That's something that we have internally and we use from Department of Finance to all the departments. We work with budget to make sure that all the departments are following the allowability of cost principle. Going to the next slide. Procurement is a very important part of uniform guidance. We want to make sure that we have documented procurement procedures in place. We maintain procurement records that detail the history of the procurement, the rationale for the method, usually competitive bid, selection of contract type, contractor selection or rejection, and the basis for the price. So this is something, again, if we're submitting out an RFP and we're asking all of you to respond and you feel like it's a lot of questions we're asking, we're really trying to maintain these procurement records. When our auditors come in every year, they are pulling out these files, they're proactively looking to see, do we have the history documented? Do we mention the rationale? Do we have the selection criteria, the evaluation committee looking at the responses? Have they properly vetted out their own choices? And the basis for the contract price. We also want to make sure that we're taking all necessary affirmative steps to ensure that minority businesses and women businesses and labor surplus areas firms are used wherever possible. But with the federal contract, we cannot require local vendors. We cannot put a requirement to say that we want only an MBE or a WBE because the idea of federal funding is to make sure that it's equitable to all. But we will definitely be able to put out the necessary affirmative steps to make sure we're following the process under the federal grant protocols, and then conducting cost or price analysis. So this is really important as well. We have multiple grants and we might be serving a variety of different services. Some of them are similar. We need to make sure that prices are competitive because that is something that the auditors look at. And when we get audited also by the Inspector General of various different federal agencies, they are looking to make sure that we're having this cost or price analysis being done and we're getting the most competitive rate possible. Next slide, please. Monitoring and reporting is extremely important. We're required to submit performance reports at intervals, usually quarterly or monthly. And if they're requiring that, that means we may need information from our departments or information from you all directly to be able to ensure that these performance reports are being submitted timely and properly. So again, if we are asking for the information, it's because we have a requirement to submit that to the federal government. The reports contain a comparison of the actual accomplishments to the objectives. A lot of the funding that we're receiving now is objective driven. We're giving a funding for a program. Have we met the objectives of the program? Are we able to show that throughout the process, not just at the end? Reasons why established goals were not met, if that's the issue. If we see that there's some reason that it's not being met, please let your department know as soon as possible. Do not wait for reporting. Do not wait for the end of the contract, because we may lose funds and may have to return funds if we're not meeting the goals. If we're doing this proactively, then it makes it easier for you to ensure that we're communicating with the federal agencies. If we need to make any adjustments, we have a chance to be able to do that, to be able to protect the funding and to make sure your programs are most effective. And then any additional pertinent information might be required, including analysis and explanation of cost, or if they're higher unit cost. So let's say, for example, you have a widget and that price has gone up by 40% and it's gone up in the market. That's something we need to know if you're submitting for reimbursement, so we can keep track, change budgets if needed with you, or inform our federal agencies. And then just to note that the construction and infrastructure performance reports do have some different requirements. On-site inspections are required a lot of the times, like if you're working with a grant that's with FHWA or the Federal Aviation Administration or IDOT through USDOT, they may come on site, do inspections. If there's any field orders or any change orders, they will have to come out and review that and approve that throughout the process. So again, documentation is key. It's not that we have to give a lot of documentation. It should be just clear, concise, and complete. And then compliance audits. Many of you may be familiar, but we are required to do compliance audits as a part of the uniform guidance, which means that our own internal auditors within the city may be working with your delegate agency contracts and your firms to be able to ensure that we're in compliance with all the criteria of the uniform grant guidance. Next slide, please. And the post-award accountability requirements. So we do have, again, as I was mentioning, periodic, usually quarterly financial reporting and performance reporting. This is to ensure the appropriate use of funds. I think this slide actually is over to the state, so I will move it to the state to go through.
Yeah, good afternoon or morning. I'm Lori Beeler, and I am the Director of the Grants Accountability and Transparency Unit in the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. So yes, in talking about the post-award accountability requirements, grant agreements, they usually do have those periodic reporting requirements for financial and performance reporting, just needing to ensure that the appropriate use of the state funds, city, county funds as well. So those are and should be spelled out in the grant agreements specifically so that all grantees understand the requirements for that reporting. In addition, typically audit requirements begin at the end of the grantee's fiscal year. So 2 CFR 200 requires a single audit for thresholds over $750,000 in expenditures for most organizations. And those audit requirements do apply. And with the state, we have automated that process. And we do have an additional requirement in that we do require grantees submit a consolidated year-end financial report through the grantee portal for the audit requirements. All state agencies are able to see that information, and the cipher, it identifies the expenditures for each grant program for that grantee based on their fiscal year. So that is a part of the audit requirements, and again, automated through the grantee portal. In addition, so talking about requirements and costs, there are indirect costs associated with grant programs. And for the state of Illinois, we have developed an indirect cost rate election system to streamline that and centralize that process within the state so that a grantee goes in and they either make their election to use the de minimis rate or say, I don't want to collect indirect cost, or to provide the opportunity for them to be able to negotiate an indirect cost rate for the state of Illinois. Then all state agencies are required to use that election, make that, and use those rates that the grantee has identified for their awards. Obviously, some programs do have caps and limitations. in from a federal perspective, those will take precedence over the elections in the system. But in general, the negotiated indirect cost rate is the rate that can be used on all grant awards within the state of Illinois. Like I said, given specific conditions. The de minimis rate is a flat 10% of modified total direct costs. All organizations minimis rate on their grant programs. So it is a means by which to make an easier election process for a grantee to be eligible to recoup indirect costs. So, all right, next slide, please. So now as part of GATA, as Jennifer had talked earlier, it was driven, the GATA initiative was driven by the grantee community. And so as the law was written and we started developing those frameworks and processes for implementing the requirements, we developed work groups, committees, and grantees made up approximately 40% of those committees. The state agencies made up the remaining membership. So we worked in collaboration with both the state agencies and the grantee community to develop those frameworks and identify what's going to work best for everyone. We regularly communicate with those state agencies. We have regular meetings and to identify any enhancements, get their input on how that implementation is going, identify areas, making sure that what we have designed, how it was intended to work, that it really is feasible, making sure that it really does work in practice. You know, looks pretty on paper, but it doesn't always work well in practice. So we are constantly looking for that feedback, and we do go to great lengths. We are currently participants. Some state agencies are doing GATA listening sessions. We have done a few roundtables. We're looking to expand that so that we can incorporate a continual conversation with the grantees and making sure that we have their feedback as well, rather than just the occasional email. Always free to email us, reach out, you know, provide suggestions, etc. But we're looking to expand that so that we have that regular communication with not just the state agencies, but the grantee community as well. So while we can't change the federal grant requirements, we can improve how we carry them out. And that is really, we're looking at that from not just the state perspective, but the county, city perspectives as well. We all want to work together to make the process as easy and as efficient as we possibly can, but while maintaining compliance with those federal grant requirements. Next slide, please. Equitable access is a priority. So from the city, county, state perspectives, we are successful when our grantees are successful. So we are going to great lengths to try to provide that assistance, communicate the information out, and provide the support necessary to make sure that all grantees are successful in carrying out their programs. We want the grant funds to be utilized by those community-based organizations and other organizations that have limited grant experience. We want to expand that grantee community. For those grantees that are already in the community, already working with it, we want to expand their capacity. We want to be able to provide those resources and that technical support. We recognize, you know, there is a learning curve and there are a lot of requirements. And it may seem overwhelming, but we can get through it. We can work through it. We can provide that technical assistance. We do have a lot of resources and we're developing more. We have targeted efforts underway to connect specific resources to those interested parties. We're expanding our training curriculums few state agencies. They have targeted training platforms. We're looking to expand those on the statewide initiatives. So there are a lot of things coming in that technical assistance area. So no, we're here to help and support you and provide any information and do what we can to make the process more efficient and effective for all parties. So our goal is we want to make the grant administration support and grant funds accessible so new entities can partner with all of us in the city, county, and state. Next slide. I think that now we're on to question and answers. Thank you.
My favorite part. Thank you all again for your participation. This is another one that has a lot of Q&As rolling in it. And so I want to start with some specific questions that I think may be easier to answer. And I actually want to also start with a comment. I want the participants who are here to understand that even if we can't answer the question or do what you're suggesting in your Q&As, a large part of this convening and an important part of this convening is what we are learning from hearing from you and seeing the types of questions and comments that questions you're asking and comments that you are raising. We hear you on the reimbursement issue, and that reimbursement structures of these grant opportunities, or importantly with businesses too, are a barrier to equitable distribution of our funding. We get that, and we are looking for ways to reduce that and reduce those barriers, but we may not have all those answers now. And so while we don't have all the answers now, what we are trying to do is prepare you as best we can for the playing field that is in front of us. Because some of the organizations have never played in this space. And we think we can help you figure out how to play in the space. And so I just wanted to say, we hear you, and the comments that you are making are not being ignored, even if we can't directly address them. So one comment, one question that I thought was, actually I hadn't thought of, because these are federal dollars, do you need a separate bank account, or is it you can still use your organizational bank account, just notate it in some way?
So this is Reshma. For the most part, you can use the same bank account, but there are provisions in specific grants where they may say, like, for example, if you're giving out funding because it's universal basic income funding, you're giving out to individuals and you have to give a set amount. In those kind of agreements, the federal government does require that we set up a separate bank account so we can clearly keep track of the money that's going out and what money is still not gone out to those individuals.
Thank you. This actually goes back to the last panel, but I think it's still important for this panel. What is considered a small organization? Is that based on size? Is it based on number of people served? Is it based on a regional area that you're working in? Can you help people understand what we mean when we say small organization? Anybody?
This is Jennifer from the state, and I would say it's going to depend on the funder. The funder's scope of the program may identify the target, including size or other characteristics that target the resources or who they're seeking applications from most directly.
Yeah, I agree with Jennifer there. Depending on the type of program, we may have different definition of what a small business or a small organization may be. So, and that would be implicit in whatever type of communication was sent out regarding.
was another question. And again, I don't know if we can answer it here, but I thought it was a fair question, so I want to raise it. We talked a lot about MBDEs and DBEs, but there's apparently the veterans program does not apply to all grants. Do you all know that? About anything about that? It's okay if you don't. I just thought like it was an interesting question, and so.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. I'm not really sure I know the answer to that particular question. I know that we do in the county provide some priority to veteran organizations. I'm fairly certain the city does as well. But with grants, I'm not so sure. I think it would depend on the source of the grant funding.
And that was one of those good examples of a question that's going to make us all think now. So
Yeah.
like we're all going to be like, huh.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Martina, is right. I mean, looking at these questions, there's some great, very thought-provoking stuff. We're definitely, going to take it back to our groups and discuss it more. See what we can do. We meant, like you said, we can't answer all the questions right now, but having the conversation is super helpful.
Thanks. And I know the audit thing was going to like scare people. So we have quite a few questions on, what type of records do we need to be compliant with audits? Is there any training on best practices for the types of internal controls and policies that we should have in place? I am again encouraging people to come to this plenary session at 1 p.m. But I don't know if people want to respond to that. Like, how do we help these organizations sort of build their muscle? Even if it's, the types of webinars and stuff that we do around specific grants. Can anyone comment on that?
Yeah, this is Reshma. So, overall, what an auditor is looking for at the end of the day is that we are able to substantiate the cost that we've listed out in the actual submission. So, for example, if we said that we bought 10 pencils for this, project, then we should be able to show that there's an invoice from Office Depot that had 10 pencils. It should be within the grant period. It's great to have it documented to say that this is for the purpose of whatever the program is, X program, and we should have some proof that we paid for it. So that's something that's important. If it's payroll, we need to make sure the payrolls are certified. If it's like construction related, and we should keep records of that. So the idea is if somebody had to come in and sort of say, trust but verify, right? Like if I trust what you're saying, but I need to verify that this payment was made, what supporting documentation can you give to be able to show? And the way I think about it is, let's say I made a payment to ComEd for a bill, and ComEd's like, I didn't get any payment from you. How would I prove that to ComEd? I would go to my bank account, maybe download the check copy, or if it's a credit card, show the statement, and then match it up to the bill that they gave to me and said, here's the bill, here's the payment, here's the proof that it got cleared, apply it to my account. So that is sort of the theory that they're using over here. That, how do we substantiate that if you said you spent $100 to be able to buy, supplies that are eligible under the program to be able to do, arts projects, let's say for kids, how do you show that? Maybe it's a receipt from Walmart that you have or something like that. So.
And Reshma, again, just talking about this reimbursement thing just a little bit more. And so for the small organizations who've never done this grant making, this type of work, they have to be ready to buy those pencils themselves, right? And then reimburse for the most part, and they get reimbursed.
Right, and that's the true essence, Tina. That's right of reimbursement. That we are the expectation is that the funds are first spent by the delegate agency and then submitted, and that's the same thing for us, right? So, for example, if a delegate agency sends us an invoice of $500,000 that they've spent over a period of 2 months, let's say, then we are paying the money first, and then we're going to the agency for the most part and saying, please reimburse this. So we we want to make sure that we're, cognizant of timing, and really the best way to be able to ensure that the invoices are processed as quickly as possible is that submit your invoices as soon as you can by the end of the month or the beginning of the following month if it's for the month. Submit it through the process that's either for the city or the state or the or for the county, whether it's uploading an iSupply or uploading into one of their systems. Make sure we do that, and make sure whatever you submit matches budget. So like, don't send us something for a line that shows, travel expenses when you don't have a budget for travel expenses, because that will slow down the process. We'll have to send the information back to you, and it just takes more time and it's more frustration. I know everybody here is short on time and short on resources, so we want to make sure to make that as streamlined as possible. And, I would say pick up the phone and talk to your agency. If you're working with Department of Public Health, or you're working with a specific agency with the state or with the county, if you have any questions before you submit, talk to your point of contact or email them and say, hey, I want to submit this. It's not showing up on my budget. What are your thoughts? And then that way we can knock down some of those things before you submit. Everybody's spending time to put it together, looking at the documents as well, and then having to kick it back.
And then someone put in, and just as it is true that when you get apply for a grant, there is usually a reporting form that comes with that grant. So, which helps you keep organized when you put your budget together, et cetera. So I did see that. People are asking for ideas for software that keeps to keep them organized. I know we don't endorse anybody's products, but there are like commercial software things like and of course I can't think of it now, but the people that do TurboTax, they have one that you can keep track of your expenses with.
And like QuickBooks.
QuickBooks. I was like, what is it called? QuickBooks. It doesn't have to be something super sophisticated, right? Someone else said it could be an Excel sheet,
Yeah, Excel is fine, right? Like QuickBooks, may charge you $60 a month, and you might not want to incur that kind of thing. And the grant might not, reimburse you for that because they're expecting the agency to have their own accounting system. Some do, some don't. But in that case, if you have a running spreadsheet, you're able to show a check register and you do reconciliations and all. It doesn't have to be fancy or expensive, but it just has to be able to stand alone on its own, where you can show the information and someone can easily link that, yes, this payment is related to this invoice and that's allowable under this grant because it matches this budget line.
So here's a question. This is straight in your sweet spot, and I see Dean is already typing, but since reimbursement is the way we do business, what type of work is going on to ensure that there are prompt payments of these expenses?
And this is a great question. I mean, we are doing a few things on prompt payments. One thing is, from the construction side of things, it's a lot of dollars get spent in a given month, and it's key to be able to get those payments out, not only to you all as delegate agencies, if you are vendors here or contractors, and you have subcontractors and yourselves that want to get paid. We have a prompt payment working initiative that we're working on right now, where we're working with our key infrastructure departments at the city to be able to streamline the process for invoices, make it standardized so we have the same process going on across the board for multiple departments, and reduce the steps that it takes for us to review. But then again, we are requesting also, and we'll be providing more information about this, that when you submit your information, it's clean, and it's concise, and it matches up to the original budget. I can't tell you how much time we spend going back and forth with agencies, returning documents back. And this is not even before it even comes to the finance section who actually reviews and finally makes the payment. This is between the department who's issued out the delegate agency agreement and the actual grantee, where it's just back and forth because the documentation is not complete. It doesn't have dates on there. Like, let's say you're submitting, payroll for the period of January. It should say January 1st to January 31st, 2022 payroll. If you don't put that information and there's no way for us to verify the dates, we can't really submit for that month. Or if there's, again, something getting submitted and it's not within the budget, it pushes things back a lot. So I would just say, try to keep a consistent methodology of submitting documents. That you have to submit every month, so maybe create a file even if it's a manila folder on your desk, and you're keeping a file of these are all the things we have to submit for this grant, or if it's QuickBooks, or if it's online and you're able to do that, scan the documents throughout the month so you're ready to go when you need to submit. That just quickens the process on our side to be able to review as well.
Anyone else want to comment on that? I've been picking on Reshma because I know where her office is, so.
Tina can knock through the walls.
There are other questions about this ARPA funding just for nonprofits or also for businesses, just to reinforce there are grant opportunities and there are contract opportunities. The question has come up again about applying for grants at all 3 levels of government. As long as there are 3 separate programs, you're not double dipping or triple dipping. There's no reason why you can't apply to different programs at all levels of government. Just looking again, just scanning through, there is one that was sort of like a question about negotiating indirect cost. And again, one of the lessons I'm taking from this webinar, this part of the webinar, is we actually need to partner with philanthropy or nonprofits or someone to do an even sort of like almost like a pre-apprenticeship program, a pre-nonprofit program to help people, both nonprofits and businesses, understand the tricks of grant making. My first grant, I didn't know what an indirect cost was. I didn't know you negotiated one with the federal government. And so I don't know if there's somebody who could talk about what indirect costs are and how they work in the grant making process. No one wants to do it.
Hey, sorry, it's Toya. Yeah, just in general, indirect costs are like administrative costs that are used to support the overhead of the organization. Typically, an organization would receive or would have a cost allocation plan that identifies all the different types of resources that are needed to run an organization. It could include building costs, utility costs, executive overhead costs. All those costs are baked into what we call indirect cost rate. That indirect cost rate and proposal must be submitted in order to justify the percentage of cost that you are looking to expense against this or expense against a particular program. In the federal government, they require their recipients to submit a cost allocation plan and an indirect cost rate. If you receive federal funds and you are a delegate agency, and you receive a lot of money, you typically will be required to submit your indirect cost proposal to the federal government, and that has to be approved through your cognizant agent. If you don't have a federal cognizant agent, then the state will allow you to submit your plan to them, and you can either choose a de minimis rate, which is a 10%, if you don't have a cost allocation plan, or if you have a cost allocation plan, you can submit that to the through the GATA system, and they will review and approve your indirect cost plan. Once you have that approved, then you can charge indirect cost against your specific program. Once again, if you don't have an indirect cost rate and you've never had one, you can elect to use a de minimis rate, which is 10%. For the city of Chicago, we also request a copy of that approved indirect cost proposal from either your cognizant agency or from your independent financial analysis. So you have to present something to us if you're requesting to use an indirect cost rate, or you can request to use a de minimis rate in which you do not have a approved cost allocation plan, or you do not have an indirect cost rate established.
Cool. So the point that I was trying to make to the nonprofits, and I appreciate all that detail, is that when you write your grant, one of the things that you get are indirect costs, because funders generally know that there are administrative expenses. That indirect cost does not always cover that, but that is, it's not just the cost of the program. There is an acknowledgement that there are indirect costs. So I want to address a question from Michael Howard. About acknowledging problems and not helping to solve them. we are working hard to solve problems. And we understand, again, that the process of grant making and contracting has presented barriers to small organizations, especially minority-owned organizations, especially African-American organizations. We know the Black community suffers disproportionately from a wealth gap. And so we appreciate you being on this call and sharing insights and information. And we want to partner with you in terms of solving these problems. I also want to be sure people know that philanthropy has a role in here. There are ways some programs for bridge funding to help organizations that are waiting for reimbursement. Sometimes you can go to financial institutions and get support if you have a grant contract in hand. But we also recognize that there are serious issues of access to capital for many minority communities, particularly the African-American community. And so we are struggling through and trying to figure out all the ways to make sure this once in a lifetime, more than a lifetime, funding opportunities are equitably distributed to those communities that were most heavily impacted by COVID. Because one of the other things that people must remember is that there is a requirement that there is a COVID link to these funding opportunities. Rod Gingrich asks a clarifying question to my flippant comment about double dipping. He's a very good question. Can you apply to the same program, but if it's only partially funded by, for example, the city, can you go build almost like a ladder? I got some funding from the city, some from the state, some from the county.
So I would say, yes, you can apply for different programs. Definitely make sure that you read the notice of funding availability to make sure that you qualify. Once again, double dipping, you don't want to double dip. So you cannot provide duplicative services across those different funding sources. So you have to make sure that you are allocating the cost appropriately to each of those sources. So if you this goes back to record keeping, financial management, just making sure that if you're applying for the state, you can appropriately isolate out the state's program from the city's program and from the county's program, and you're not reporting the same recipients across those organizations.
Can I make it simpler? I'm going back to the pencils. I need 100 pencils. The city gave me enough money for 33 pencils. Can I go to the county to get money for the other 33? Can I go to the state for the other 33? And I don't know if the county or state can comment on that. And I still got a pencil not paid for doing that, man.
Yeah, sorry. This is Reshma. So I would say yes, as long as you separate, pencil 1 to 33 has to be charged to one, pencil 34 to 66 has to be charged to another, and you will have to keep better records for that. So, that would be scrutinized more because the agency would be coming in the same, it might be the same grant in the agency. So they might want to make sure, how are you segregating those costs between the different, types of government that are giving you funding. There are some grants that don't allow for that. So, if they don't allow for you to get the same kind of grant from another agency, you have to look at that. And then there are some grants that require some kind of matching component. So they may say that out of the 100 pencils, you have to pay for 20 pencils. And so if there's a matching component aspect, there might be where that matching component cannot be covered by the grant. It has to be covered through some other private source.
Yeah, and I think, as we look at those, all of this information is going to be publicly reported. The city and the county and the state will all be working together. So we'll be monitoring, making sure, obviously, if there's suspected double dipping going on, we'd have to look into that and make sure that everything is being accounted for correctly.
So this has been a lot. And see, people are saying this even in the chat now. Again, all of this information is going to be available on various websites. They'll be put in the chat. We will also send the information out to everyone who registered for this program. And so we will, we know that this is a lot and we want to make sure you have access to it. So we will be taking steps to ensure that that has happened. I also want to encourage people to come to the afternoon sessions, which are very specific. Human services, including violence prevention, this track A, track B, I'm going to get it wrong, but one is transportation and infrastructure, really important to small businesses because those are RFPs for contracts will be discussed there. And then community development, economic development, small business support. There's also a track for that. We do not have a lot of RFPs actually ready. And so if people were coming here expecting to go over the specific RFPs, I'm so sorry to disappoint. Those that we know about, we will talk about. But these RFPs are going to be coming out on a rolling basis over the next few years. And so, you know, we just, again, this was our initial conversation with community. We hope to have many, many more.